I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. So I want to welcome you to tonight's show. On tonight's show, we're going to be talking about the second episode of Moon Knight on Disney Plus. A little bit of spoiler-free, then a little bit of a deep dive conversation. And in addition to that, we're going to be talking about some interesting news actually coming out of the Discovery deal and what it may or may not mean actually for DC Comics moving forward. That and maybe a little bit more. Who knows? This might be a short episode on tonight's episode of the Retro Rogues Live. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts for nearly the last 30 years. Been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such as the recently announced it's going to get a movie deal. I worked on covers actually for Mark Waid's Irredeemable. In addition to that, I also worked on Cuphead. That's right, Cuphead DLC Delicious Last Course, which is going to be coming out in June. I actually worked on that. Also, Batman Incorporated, Justice League of America, and even Superboy and Legion of Superheroes. But enough about that. And welcome back, as always, my great co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks who'll be watching or listening at home some of the fun things you have worked on as a creative professional.
Hello, everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God. That's Bass God, like a bass guitar. And I am the Chief Financial Officer of Bad Bob Productions, which is a film production company located in Arizona. I'm currently the executive producer on a film called Staycation, which is actively shooting right now on location in California.
Very cool. Very cool. It looks like Hollywood is in the Rogues Gallery. Hi, Hollywood.
Hey, Hollywood. Good to see you.
Glad to see you here. All right. So let's just go ahead and get in to, I guess, our first topic. And obviously, those of you, if you come in, we want to encourage you, please post from wherever you are. We want to know what you think about our various topics. We're going to start off by talking about Moon Knight. So please, if you're on Facebook, I think you can't watch it on Twitter, but if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitch, wherever you are, please post, comment from wherever you are. We'll put your comments up live on the screen. We want to know your thoughts. So we're going to be talking about the second episode of Moon Knight on Disney Plus. I have actually seen it, which is a very good thing. And I know how I felt about it. We're going to start off a little spoiler-free, and then we'll go into our deep dive. And really get into the nitty gritty of this episode, which I thought had some fun stuff in it. And it looks like Jane is in the house. Hi, Mom.
Hey, Jane. Good to see you.
All right, so here we go. This is another Moon Knight Rising update. That's right. Great art here by James Stone and myself. Very fun piece. If you're curious to learn even more about Moon Knight, even though you're watching the show, you can always go over to davebeatty.com, www.davebeaty.com, and actually download the Retro Rogues fanzine. It is a free digital download. It is yours to have and own. It is our gift to you. There's a very interesting write-up in there actually about Moon Knight that I actually did that might actually answer some questions if you're slightly confused. But anyhow, enough about that. You can go check that out. Looks like David Motz is in the house. Hi, David. Glad to see you here.
Hey, Dave. Good to see you.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So we'll start off with just our initial overall thoughts about the second episode of Moon Knight. Eric, do you have the title? Because I don't remember what the title actually was.
Summon the Suit.
Summon the Suit. Why did I forget that? That's such a big theme in the episode, too. Spoiler alert. Anyhow, so we're going to start off with initial thoughts about the second episode of Moon Knight, Summon the Suit. It looks like Chris Roberts is in the house. Hi, Chris.
Glad to have Chris. You here. Good to see you here.
All right.
And definitely, folks, if you have seen the episode, chime in and let us know what you think as well. We're going to start spoiler-free for those that maybe haven't seen it and then maybe are going to maybe mute us because we will put the spoiler ticker up when we start talking about spoilers. But definitely let us know your thoughts on the episodes if you've seen it.
Yes. Well, why don't we start with you, Eric? What did you think of the second episode of Moon Knight?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting how they dealt with things. I just overall I really enjoyed it. It's hard to get super specific, right? When we're just talking spoiler free, but
right.
I think in my mind, if people were a little confused in the first episode, I do think that the second episode helps to clear some things up. And I think you should be getting up to speed at this point. As someone who is not very familiar with the character, but I do have the advantage of you, who is very familiar with the character, and we've been talking about this, I think, for like a year now. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I get little bits and pieces from you. I ask you direct questions about the character and things like that. But I know for a lot of people, Moon Knight is kind of an obscure character, and so they might be confused, especially with the first episode if they went in cold and just had no idea who this character is or what he's about.
Right.
Maybe they didn't even watch the trailers because they didn't want to be spoiled, because trailers do tend to have spoilers sometimes and all that kind of stuff. But I
Right.
really feel in my mind that at this point you should be kind of figuring out what's going on. And I think they're doing a good job in my mind of doing that. And again, I sound a little bit like a broken record because I was very concerned about these reviewer copies and the fact that they got 4 episodes of a 6-episode miniseries. And I was like, they need 4 episodes to figure this out. And I
Right.
think in some ways, maybe Disney and Marvel were actually kind of like, maybe they don't give people enough credit. I don't know. I mean, because to be honest, I haven't heard a lot of other reviews. I saw some initial
Right.
reaction where people seemed confused of the first episode, but I've actually kind of haven't heard a lot of reviews from other people as far as what they're thinking. But in my mind, at this point, you really should, by the second episode, you really should have a good sense of what's going on. And I appreciate that because he has a confusing character. So, um, Chris has a comment. He says, I didn't really know anything about the character, but the show has me interested in learning more about him. And I think that's how I feel as well. Chris, that kind of sums it up for me, because I'm in that same position where I really don't know a lot. Although again, I do have the benefit of Dave. We talked about the fanzine. That is a good primer, just with that information there, where there's these little summaries of all these different sort of highlights of the Moon Knight comics. And I read it, obviously, and I'm just like, that does help. But I am coming in rather cold. Jane mentions, she said, I have seen both episodes and watched them both twice. So there you go. So, Dave, what are your thoughts on episode 2, Summon the Suit?
I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a MCU version of Moon Knight for sure. We talked about that actually with the last episode. This is definitely an MCU version of Moon Knight. But I really enjoyed the episode overall. I'm really enjoying the show. Um, it is interesting too how, like you said, Eric, like it totally fits within the MCU, like, just with the same kind of humor and everything. Like it's definitely, and it's weird because I know that the Netflix shows, which are now on Disney Plus, I believe, that those are definitely in canon now, which is interesting because I feel like the
Yes.
Netflix shows are the things that kind of sit off to the side that don't really quite fit. I mean, they do and they don't, because they have a very different tone. And I was expecting Moon Knight to be a little bit more in tone with the Netflix shows
Yes. Mm-hmm.
than
I
it
think that's
actually
probably the
is.
most surprising thing to me so
Yeah,
far. And I mentioned that, talking about the previous episode as well, that, I anticipated, especially with Disney Plus making this big deal about now they have mature content, and it's just
right.
because of the Netflix shows. And I
Yeah.
totally expected that Moon Knight was going to fit with that, but no, it actually fits perfect with the overall MCU. It really doesn't
I
go
think,
more in that Netflix style.
yeah, and I think if it's going to, the next episode might be the one that might push the boundary. But we can get more into that when we actually get into the spoilers, because there's something that happens in the second episode that I feel like definitely could push us more into that Netflix territory, depending upon how they want to handle it. Because I feel like the hard knock stuff is going to be in the next episode. So we'll see. But overall, I'm really enjoying it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's something I look forward to. Um, I can, Fridays is really, right now with everything going on, is the best opportunity kind of I have to watch it. Um, but no, I'm really enjoying it. And I'm really, I don't think we're going to get a larger context for how this is all going to fit in by the end of these six like episodes. Like I feel like if Moon Knight in the MCU is going to be rounded out a little bit more, I think it's going to happen in something down the road, which will sound kind of weird, like exactly where Khonshu and everything kind of fits in. With, you know, for example, like, you know, the Norse gods that we get in Thor, right? Like I feel like we're not going to get those answers until later. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some answers actually in Love and Thunder of all things.
That's interesting. That's interesting
Yeah,
take, because in my mind, I would think that it's at least possible we might get something in the next Doctor Strange film, because to me, Doctor Strange, and now the way that they've sort of, I don't know, rebooted Scarlet Witch in a lot of ways, that, you know, made her less, I guess, less mutant, more magic. I mean, I think that's
yeah,
the way to put it, you know. Um,
right.
and she's obviously gonna, you know, be in the Doctor Strange movie. It seems to me like Moon Knight would fit in very well, you know, in that environment. But that's an interesting take that you have, because I didn't even think about the whole Norse gods versus the Egyptian god thing, and that is an interesting idea. Chris also had a comment where he says, speaking of the gods, he said, "I'm also very much enjoying how Khonshu is in the show. Favorite quote so far has been, 'Oh great, the idiot is back.'" And
Right. Yeah.
I wish I could do the voice. That one thing I sometimes think is like, why is the voice so comical? Like, do you? I'm curious. Like, that's not really a spoiler, because at this point, you know, it was in the first episode, so
Right.
it's not really a spoiler that Khonshu's in it. I mean, that's a big part of the character and everything. But I'm curious what you think, as far as like, for someone that's been with the comics, like, in any way, was that sort of the voice you would have expected from Khonshu?
No, it's not. That's why I
And
keep saying it's kind of more an MCU version of Moon Knight. That is not the show. While I'm really enjoying the show. Okay, and this is not meant as a criticism of the show at all. I'm really enjoying the show, but my Moon Knight show would have been pretty different in tone. And Khonshu would have been a little bit more ominous. But also, like I said, I feel like if we're going to get more of that, I think that's potentially in the next episode, because
would it be more Netflix and less Disney?
yes, yeah, it would. My in my mind, what I would have done with Moon Knight is much more in line with Daredevil and Punisher. That's just because that, for me, that's the right kind of vibe. You know, avenging hero in a suit, ex mercenary, you know, paramilitary, like that. That to me kind of sits kind of in between those two. And you know, Frank Castle is dealing with some stuff, you know, so he is suffering from post traumatic stress disorder, you know, and then Daredevil is also wrestling with the concept of God and his place in the world, and you know, what does it mean for him to use his gifts, and should he use his gifts, why should he, you know, like, you know, service over self, like all of these concepts that you find in Punisher and Daredevil and Netflix, I feel like also could fit within Moon Knight. I feel like that, and that's in my mind, that's kind of what I was expecting. I was expecting Moon Knight to maybe even be that bridge between the Netflix and the MCU, and also be the olive branch into the supernatural, you know, with the werewolves and the vampires and all this kind of stuff, which I don't think we're going to get that much of, to be honest. I think the show has taken a very different turn from what I was expecting, and it is definitely more MCU than I was expecting as well. It's very much a, it's very much like, for example, like in the Iron Man comics, like the Demon in the Bottle story is like a big deal, and Tony Stark is like a full on drunk, you know, and he deals with a lot of issues before he eventually gets back, you know, into the suit. At one point, he loses control of Stark Enterprises. That's how Rhodey, James Rhodes, ends up becoming Iron Man for a certain period of time. He loses control of his technology, and that's what triggers the armor wars. And that's all partially because of his alcoholism. And it's a pretty dark thing, you know. Um, and then when you see how they handle it in the MCU, they deal with it and they bring it up and they kind of talk about it, but they don't hard knocks deal with it. And, you know, but if Iron Man had been a Netflix show, they would have hard knocks dealt with, you know, Tony
Yeah.
Stark's alcoholism. It would have been much more an examination of it. So that's how I feel like, in my own personal opinion, how Moon Knight doesn't really fit my imagination, is just because I was expecting something that was going to be a bridge between Netflix and MCU, but then also, have that olive branch that was going to bring in the supernatural elements that I was really hoping for. But we still have several episodes to go. I am still very much enjoying it. It is not meant as a heavy-handed criticism of the show. I'm just telling everyone that it didn't really fit my imagination of what I was expecting, but that doesn't make it bad. It's just different. So, and I'm really enjoying it. I guess this is the weird thing, Eric. It's a little bit more fun than I was expecting it to be so far, and not as dark like as what I was expecting. I was expecting something much more dark.
How does the humor contribute to that? Like I'm guessing, just based on what you've just been saying and everything, that the comics really don't have the level of humor that they have in the show. How do you feel
No.
about that?
Well, it is very different tonally. But like, for example, like Stephen Grant in the comics and Stephen Grant in the Moon Knight show are very different. Stephen Grant in the comics is a millionaire. He's basically like Bruce Wayne. I mean, that's basically what Stephen Grant is. He's the socialite, philanthropist kind of a guy. Well, not really a philanthropist, but he is definitely like uber wealthy. The mansion at the edge of the city where Moon Knight has all his stuff, kind of, that's Stephen Grant's abode. And he's very much the suave, debonair, Bruce Wayne kind of type, is the way that Stephen Grant sometimes comes across, except in Fist of Khonshu, which deviates from that a little bit. But that's what Stephen Grant is. Stephen Grant is Bruce Wayne. Stephen Grant is not, a guy suffering from, dissociative disorder who works in a museum gift shop. That's a very, and I like the accent because it helps to tell the difference between the different identities, which I think is a great idea. But that Stephen Grant and the Stephen Grant I read are very different. Stephen Grant is almost borderline at times tortured, like Bruce Wayne is, and it's so weird because I feel like Robert Pattinson's portrayal of Bruce Wayne in the Batman movie is kind of more what I was expecting from Stephen Grant, as opposed to what we're getting. But then also too, I could see where tonally, this will sound weird, but I could also see where tonally, and I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but by the time we get enough of Mark Spector to get a sense of who Mark Spector the mercenary is, I'm like going, those would have canceled each other out because maybe they would have been too similar. Because Mark Spector is definitely haunted and tortured. And I'm like, those two would have canceled each other out. They wouldn't have seemed very different. So I understand why they chose to portray it the way that they did. And to me, it works, but it's definitely more MCU because they use that persona of Stephen Grant to lean into the comedy more than I would have thought or expected.
It's kind of interesting to me because in a lot of ways, it actually reminds me of the Christopher Reeves version of Superman and the decision that he made, along with the director, that, Clark Kent was going to be kind of a dork, and it was a way for him to show the contrast and also kind of get around the glasses thing, right? To say like, oh, he just puts glasses on and somehow nobody knows that he's Superman. It's like, well, you can almost see it with the way that Christopher Reeves portrays him, because Clark Kent is so unassuming. He's so dorky, nerdy and all that kind of stuff, and so awkward. And of course, Superman is the exact opposite of that. Whereas like in the George Reeves version of Superman, Clark Kent wasn't a dork. You know what I mean? Clark Kent was actually very much a matter-of-fact, reporter, and he definitely could compete just as well with Lois Lane. He wasn't just like her, her something for her to laugh at. She respected him. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing. Like it's a completely different portrayal, and I can understand, very well why Christopher Reeves did that, because also in the comic books, again, he wasn't like that. not until Christopher Reeves did it. You know what I mean? So it's like Clark Kent was always kind of, like I said, he was just like this matter of fact reporter, and he wasn't a dork. You know what I mean? He was pretty suave, and he dressed well and all that kind of stuff. He wasn't awkward. So I can understand, and we've talked about that before, and we kind of talked about that when we were anticipating the show, that we know there's going to be changes, because there are just certain things that just might not work. And also, they're always going to put their spin on it, right? Because the filmmakers are always going to want to do kind of their thing as well. The actors are going to want to do their thing, their interpretation. So, but I am very curious, since I don't really have the basis of comparison that you do, just how you're feeling about that, as far as these little differences and everything.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you bring up an interesting point I hadn't thought about, because I mentioned in a previous episode how there are homages and nods and salutes to things that are greater than just Moon Knight. That's kind of more a loving salute to comics in general. And also, like, even you could even look at as comics adapted to film or comics adapted to television, because I hadn't really considered that, because there is a Chris Reeve, Clark Kent kind of thing with how they're working with Stephen Grant in order to set him up differently from Mark
Right.
Spector, to the point that you could almost see that scene in a Superman 3, which I love that scene in Superman 3, where Superman and Clark Kent are kind of having at their issues. And Superman is even telling Clark Kent, I've been waiting for this for a long time, and basically him taking his frustrations out. You can see some of that with how they've set up Stephen Grant and Mark Spector. There is that control for the body. Like, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, I don't know if they had those conversations, but if they did, I find that really interesting, because that's a neat way to kind of homage and talk about and look at those choices that Chris Reeve made, with his Superman and his Clark Kent, even within the context of Moon Knight and the dissociative disorder idea. That's an interesting angle I hadn't actually thought about, that I think actually is pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Did you have anything else before we get into spoilers? Any other?
No,
Well, did you like it? Did you like the episode?
No, I did. I really liked the episode. I'm jonesing actually to see the third one, because I'm really curious to see where we're going to go with the third one, because I can't get into spoilers, but where they leave it really has me excited for the next episode, because we're about to see some potentially dark, twisted stuff, and we're about to learn an awful lot more about not only Moon Knight and Khanshu and the bargain and whatever else is going on. We're about to get into that knee deep in the next episode.
Right on. All right, so I think we can go ahead and transition into spoilers. It looks like Hollywood and Mott's on YouTube are having their own little conversation here.
All right.
as we start going into spoilers, I'll leave this as sort of like a little bumper. So, of course, Hollywood has to say something about Picard. So, as I hear Picard is going to be in the new Top Gun movie, and Mott's was asking him who the wingman's going to be, and he says he's teaming up with Fox Mulder. They are looking for the truth. There you go. So,
all right, there you go.
Folks, spoiler warning, we are going to definitely start getting into spoilers. And Mons does say that the third one is good. So he's seen the third episode already. Good. By the way, this time I did not go ahead and watch the next episode. I know last week I did, and I did like a sort of like, spoiler-free review of episode 2 or whatever, at the end of our review. I didn't do that because honestly, it was a little difficult for me. And there were things that I wanted to say to Dave really bad. Because he was actually kind of just, without knowing it, he was leading me in directions and stuff like that. And I was like, man, I really want to tell him about this. And so to kind of keep that so that I don't have that, don't have that pull this time, I didn't even watch the third episode yet. So I'm just gonna sort of wait now for Dave to catch up, and we'll do the spoiler. We'll do it like we've always done, where we do a spoiler free at the beginning, and then we'll go into the deep dive. And so I have not seen the third episode, but Montz does say it's good.
All right, very cool, very cool. And I'm trying to not really spoil anything, but there are definitely images from the third episode that have been circulating around, and I have quite enjoyed. Actually, there's actually a pretty cool shot actually that I'm pretty excited for the third episode. That I'm not trying to see stuff, but I know there's going to be a killer fight scene. It looks like in the third episode.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually haven't seen any shots from the third episode, so I'm going into it clean right now.
Very cool. All right, so in the so we're going to get into it here. Oh, this is interesting. So Jane actually posts, do you think the statue is real to Steven? The statue closed his eyes. Huh. All right. Well, that's an interesting one, Mom. The statue of Khanshu. So there is this statue of Khanshu, and it is an important part of the sort of Moon Knight mythos. The Steven and the statue are usually typically not really separated. So I'm really curious to see what they're going to tell us about that statue. Like, does it hang around his neck, almost like Dracula in the coffin? I talked about like the idea of he has the sand that helps him to know, like, if he's gotten up right and been walking around. And I've alluded to that. I think there's an interesting Dracula angle to this whole thing, where he is kind of the undead to an extent. And they allude to as much actually in this episode. There's a conversation that actually takes place actually between Khanshu and Mark Spector. And we do get this kind of idea, I think, thrown out there that Mark Spector may not just be like schizophrenic dissociative disorder idea, but Mark Spector might actually be someone else's soul trapped inside Stephen Grant's body. That these different aspects that we think are of one person's personality split into three, because I do think there's a third personality there, because in the Moon Knight mythos there's always three. That I feel like that what they could even be doing with this is taking this to an even darker place, and where maybe even the body that we think of as Stephen Grant, or that Stephen Grant thinks is his, may also not even be his as well. That it's not one person with multiple personality disorder, but maybe this is one person with three different spirits trapped inside him. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with this. But
yeah, I wish Ronnie was here, because Ronnie last week had said that was his theory, and I was kind of like, I can't say anything, you know what I mean? Because I had seen the episode, and he was right on. I wish he was here, because he's right on. That's 100% what they've done. They definitely allude to the fact that that's what it is. It's that, at least right now, what they're saying is it's Steven's body, and Mark is just visiting. You know what I mean? Mark is just kind of there, and we don't know exactly. I don't think they say exactly what the circumstances are, but the impression that I got was that, like, basically Mark died or something like that, and Khonshu saved him by putting his soul into Steve's body. That's the take that I got.
And that also leans into, to an extent, that also leans into the revised Moon Knight origin that we got in Moon Knight #1 in the 70s, because in that one, there's an archaeological dig that is going on, and that's where Mark Spector appears to die and is basically resurrected, basically in the shadow of the statue of Khanshu. And that's when and there's a cape or a cloak or something that's wrapped around it, and in different versions he will take that off and put that on, and that's actually where the cloak sometimes comes from. And it's interesting too, because I'm wondering, because we've seen that shot in the trailer where he's jumping and attacking and fighting these guys, and we see the crescent moon shape of the cape. which again is something that we have, from the comics, because Bill Sienkiewicz and a lot of artists used to draw that in to the character to give him visual flair, in the same way that Batman artists draw out the scalloped cape and make it look like the shape of a bat on the ground and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome and fun. But I'm wondering if there might be magical properties beyond that. And we've seen some things that would suggest that this cape might be more in line with, Doctor Strange's cloak, that these things might be connected, which I think, Eric, actually could lead some credence to what you were saying, that maybe might be something interesting we learn about Moon Knight actually in Doctor Strange, possibly. And that's the thing that's really cool about this character, is he could, because of what they've done with him, he could fit in a lot of different ways. But Mark Spector, the mercenary, did die in the original comics on the mission and was resurrected. So it would be interesting if Mark Spector is a completely different person and his spirit was put into Stephen Grant.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting what they're doing there, and I'm liking it. I think that it's the way that they've done it is good, and I think, like I said, when Ronnie threw that out there, I was just like, yeah, that just seems a good way to go about it. It's like you said, it's not so much that he really does have this disorder; it really is another soul occupying his body. Which I think is a really interesting way to go. And I enjoy the way that they do the whole mirror thing and the way that they talk to each other. And I thought it was also really interesting how they actually, flipped that a little bit, where they kind of basically they put them in the opposite positions. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I really like that, where it's like, because generally we see, Steve kind of arguing with Mark. And then when Mark takes over, Steve is pretty much unaware of what's going on. We actually talked about the last episode, how kind of cool that was, right? That we were enjoying those scenes where Steve was just like, had no idea what was going on, and he's like going back and forth. But I did like what they did in terms of, flipping that around. And then for the first time, we do have, Mark in control. But now Steve is talking to him. You know what I mean? And Steve is like, hey, you know what I mean? What about me? That kind of a thing. And it's the first time that it's happened. And it's also interesting to see that once that happens, Steve has a better understanding of what Mark is going through. Right. Because before, he just sort of blacked out and he didn't have any recollection of what's going on. And to be awake, right, when these things are going on, he was like, that really sucks. That's what you go through all the time with me. You know what I mean? Because, you want to come out and I won't let you or whatever. And he's like, yeah, that's what it's like. It really, really sucks,
And I thought it was cool too, because they show us how completely different, in a weird way, like the two maybe don't quote unquote live, but potentially could live, because in the midst of this episode, Stephen ends up, by trying to investigate who Mark is, he winds up actually in that bunker where Mark has like money and weapons, and he's got like a cot and looks like changes of clothes and all this other stuff. And it's definitely more kind of Spartan, and kind of militaristic, and how it's kind of put together. And it's just so completely different from, where he, lives. It's just Stephen Grant. And then also too, we also learn about a basically that Mark is married and in the process of getting a divorce from Layla, the lady who he was talking with on the phone. And we had theorized, or I had talked with someone, and we had theorized, I think we did on the show, that this character might turn out to actually be the MCU version of Frenchie. And Frenchie is basically sort of this person who owed his life to Mark Spector. He's the helicopter pilot. He's his, second kind of like Alfred is to, Bruce Wayne, Batman. I feel like that's what this character is going to wind up being, is an MCU version of Frenchie now, because when you learn about their connection, it kind of fits in an interesting way and kind of makes sense, why they would be, drawn back into each other's sphere and have that connection and maybe have a care for each other, but it not be the I owe you my life kind of thing. It's more of a we shared a lot, we were together, and even though we're not, we still care and look out for each other potentially by the end of the series. I'm really curious to see where this is going to go, but I do think this character is going to be the MCU version of Frenchie.
Is Mark married in the comics?
No, Mark has Steven, Mark, whatever. They have one sort of love interest girlfriend, which is Marlene Alaroon. And I don't think Marlene Alaroon is going to figure into this at all. I think that they've removed Marlene altogether, and that the love interest in Frenchie, they've taken those two and made them one.
Right.
And I think that's what's going to happen, because all we need to see is her flying a helicopter, and that's basically who she is. She's the MCU version of Frenchie.
Interesting. So what do you think of this character? So this is a brand new character. This is something that they've created for the television series. I'm curious what you think, especially as being someone that's so into the comics and so familiar with the comics. What do you think about this new character?
I like the new character. I like how she fits into the story. It is sort of like, again, it kind of fits that MCU mold. But I do like the character, and I find it an interesting way to take the character of Frenchie and look at it from a different angle. And so if that's what they're doing, I think it's really cool. But we'll know in a couple of episodes if that's where they're actually going with this or not, because it's alluded to as well that Mark actually tells Steven, when Steven's trying to confide information to her, Mark is like, you don't understand. You cannot bring her into this, because if you do, Khanshu has told me he wants her for the next operative.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That she will be essentially the next Moon Knight. You cannot do this to her. And that's the whole reason he's trying to divorce her and he's trying to keep her away, is because he's afraid of what the future may hold for her if she gets sucked too far into what's happening with Moon Knight and Mark Spector. We do have some other people in the Rogues Gallery I want to say hi to. Looks like Maria is here. Hi, Maria.
Hey, Maria. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. And if you've seen the episode, please comment. Let us know your thoughts. I'd be really curious what you think of this. I'm not even sure if Maria's watching this show, so I'm kind of curious if she has been and what her thoughts on it. So, and Asia's in the house too. So, hey, Asia.
Hi, gorgeous. And no, yeah, I'm really curious to see kind of what they're going to do with this, because if she is a version of Frenchie, she's good, and we've seen that she has some hand-to-hand combat skills. She's going to be ex-military and be incredibly capable. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm just waiting to see her fly a helicopter. When she gets in a helicopter and she knows how to fly, and we already know that she knows how to fight, I'm like, I'm really curious where they're going to go with this, because we'll just see. We'll see. I have some theories, but we'll see.
Well, I want to go back to what you were talking about when Mark revealed that basically she's supposed to be the next Moon Knight. So if Mark can finally, unburden himself, so to speak, the idea is that she might be the one to take over, and he doesn't like that idea at all. No. And it's kind of interesting because they also go backwards. Asia had a comment where she said, "I must say Ethan Hawke is working hard in his role. He is owning all his scenes. He is really making you wonder if the villain's right or wrong in his context." And it is interesting, that idea that, with villains, the really good villains are actually, in their mind, they're the hero. And so I wanted to go back to Ethan and this idea that Ethan says that he used to be the Moon Knight. And I thought that was really interesting. Is that something that, you have, is that there's some equivalent in the comics of this, or this particular character is even in the comics? I'm really curious.
Well, this character does come from the comics, but it is definitely not the same. So we have to remember when we're talking about Moon Knight that Moon Knight has become more of a thing, and this is definitely the MCU version of Moon Knight. when Moon Knight was originally created, I mean, he was basically like a suit and some weapons given to Mark Spector, who is a mercenary, to kill a werewolf by the committee. Okay, so I think it was the committee or the council. I think it was the committee. And so he was basically a villain of the month. He was a two-parter villain of the month. He was not an avatar of Khanshu. Like, all this stuff came later. And then they retconned his origin and brought in these other aspects, and then kind of tried to find a way to bring it full circle. Because Moon Knight was, like I said last week or week before, was created on the run. He ended up being really popular, and so they kind of were constantly tinkering with him. Now, so in that sense, you know, Ethan Hawke's character was never quote unquote the Moon Knight and then whatever, because that just wasn't a thing. He does say that he was like Mark, and said that he was an avatar, you know, essentially of Khonshu, that he did at one time work with Khonshu. But I have the feeling, because of how he is, I don't think he worked with Khonshu in the same way that Mark Spector is working with Khonshu. I think they are very, very different in terms of like how they work and what they do. Does that make sense? Like, I like Ethan Hawke as an avatar and doing the bidding of Khonshu is a very different thing from Mark Spector, because Mark Spector is very much, you know, they say mercenary, but I mean, he's definitely ex-military. So the way that Khonshu would use him as a weapon and a tool is very different from how he would use Ethan Hawke's character, who is much more of a manipulator. And also, too, in the way that he uses apparently magic, you know, again, a manipulator, you know, a controller, right? Almost like a handler, if you want to look at it as CIA, because at one point they said that Mark Spector was CIA. It's the same thing. This guy's like a handler, you know, versus an agent in the field. They're two different things. And I also think that he's playing Mark Spector when he says that. I think that he has basically dealt with other avatars, maybe of other gods. And so he's used to having to manipulate and twist them in order to get them into a certain position. Because there is a point in which he does kill someone, and it's kind of a little shocking the way that he does it, you know, and he seems a little remorseful, but on the same point, it's sort of like, I just got to do this. Like, so we'll see exactly. I feel like we haven't learned everything about his character, and there's much more to what's happening here than we're even aware of so far.
I thought it was interesting, the conversation that he had with Stephen, where he is sort of explaining, you know, where he's coming from, and that he is in the service of a different Egyptian god, and the idea that the Egyptian god that he serves, basically, it kind of reminded me of that what was that Tom Cruise movie, the one where basically they do they basically charge you with future crimes, you know. I don't know if
Minority
you're familiar.
Report.
Minority Report. And it was like, so that's what this guy does. That's what this god does, is basically they're doing Minority Report, you know? And I thought that was really interesting. And of course, Steven's just like, he gets into those, you know, those really, you know, those moral arguments that, you know, I think people have heard a million times, like, you know, would you kill Hitler as a baby, that kind of a thing, right? If you go back in time. And he's like, you know, I draw the line at that, at child murder. You know,
that's a great
I draw the line at child murder. So it was really interesting to me to see, you know, what Ethan Hawke actually is about, because you get an indication in the first episode about that with the scales, and when he kills that old woman and all that kind of stuff. That something's going on there, but you don't really have 100% sense until he tells you, you know, he tells Steve specifically that, no, this is what I do. Basically, I basically, you know, I root out evil before it even happens. And you're just kind of sitting there like, well, that doesn't seem right. You know, the person hasn't done anything yet, you know, but that's their philosophy. Whereas Khonshu, in contrast, he waits. You know, he waits for someone to actually do something, and then he goes after him, or specifically his avatar does, right? The Moon Knight goes after him. So I thought that was interesting, and it kind of puts them in interesting places as far as, you know, this particular villain, and then Moon Knight being the quote unquote hero. And it does kind of show you, you know, what the conflict is that's going on between the two of them, and they're very different philosophies towards kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Maria did mention, she said, I'm watching you guys to learn more about the show. I just started it on the first episode. So, Maria, we are doing spoilers, but hopefully you'll still be able to enjoy the discussion, because Dave has given us a lot of insight, especially if you're like me and you don't know anything about the comics. I think it's really interesting to have someone to talk to and say, well, is this in the comics, or how do they do this in the comics, that kind of stuff. So, and what we're finding out is a lot of this is brand new. You know what I mean? There's definitely a different take going on. And then also Matthew Reed is in the house. Just want to acknowledge you. Says hi everyone. Hi Matt, appreciate you stopping by. And if you're watching the show, please let us know what your thoughts are about episode 2 of Moon Knight, Summon the Suit.
And this scene is a really great scene because I liked how everyone played it. Like Ethan Hawke, the way that he is like setting up, like philosophically, here's what's happening. And at the same point going, oh, he's talking to you, isn't he? You know, Khanshu's telling you to do this, isn't he? And it was really kind of cool. But on the flip, I also really enjoyed how, you know, Oscar Isaac was playing Stephen Grant. And I like how Stephen Grant at one point, you know, he made a stand and he's like, yeah, I'm not into killing children.
Child murder. And I draw the line at child murder.
Yeah, I have to, you know, take a stand. And what was really interesting too is that Layla apparently knows about the suit, because she keeps telling him, well, summon the suit. Suit. And then we get that scene where he finally summons the suit, and then we get the Mr. Knight persona. And it is very, very different from Moon Knight. So it's basically Steven in control and having the powers and having the suit, but having absolutely no idea what he is doing at all. And then we get this really great line. I can't remember it exactly because I've only seen this episode once, but there's that really great line where Mark is looking at him and he's like, we look like a deranged Colonel Sanders or something. Yeah. Or psychotic Colonel Sanders or something. It's a really great line and a very funny moment. And then we actually get a classic Moon Knight weapon. He actually reaches behind his jacket and actually pulls out the clubs. And I was just like,
that's the image that I have up right now.
Yeah, and it's just he's like, he doesn't even know what to do with them, you know. And I was just like, wow, okay. So this was really cool, and I had a lot of fun with this. And this goes back to what I said before. I feel like with the suit, they are nodding to Greatest American Hero a little bit, and poking fun actually at the same time at the Werewolf by Night origin, because it's a similar thing. He's given the suit with a bunch of weapons and said, we want you to go do this thing. And it's very much like Greatest American Hero, where the aliens give him the suit. He doesn't know how to use it. He loses instruction manual and he can barely, you know, use all these powers. And I kept thinking about that. I was watching this scene going, I feel like they're having a little fun with Moon Knight, but on the flip, I feel like they're also nodding to Greatest American Hero.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that they did that, because I know that was one of the things that I was like sitting there like, I can't talk, because you kept saying like, how are they going to incorporate the other costume? And yeah. I thought the way they did it was really neat, and I really liked it. And I like the fact, because the female character is sitting there like, like you said, she's like, put on the suit, or bring the suit or whatever. And so literally he brings a suit, like an actual business suit, right? Because that's the way Steve's mind works, or doesn't work, I should say, almost, right? It's just like he brings an actual suit, which I thought was really funny. By the way, Robert's in the house. He says, what's up, everyone? Just passing by. Robert, of course, is my partner. He is the chief executive officer, the CEO of Bad Bob Productions. Robert, thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate that. And I don't know if Robert's been watching the show. Robert, if you had any comments, I don't know if you've been watching the show. I'd be interested to hear what your take is on it as well. But how does this, contrast with the comic books?
No, it is very different from what we know of Mr. Knight. And I didn't read all of the Mr. Knight books, full disclosure. I only read like the first couple of issues. But it's very different because Mr. Knight, rides around in a limo and he wears a suit, and it's sort of like a Equalizer kind of idea. Like if you have a problem, if you can find him, kind of thing. Like That's a little bit too much A-team. I didn't mean A-team, but it's like the Equalizer, like he has a particular set of skills. Now it's like I'm talking about Liam Neeson. I don't know the right way to describe it, but it's like the Equalizer. Because if you remember, with the Equalizer, you contact him, you explain your problem, and then he would come in and basically handle it or help you with it. And then occasionally, like,
that is very A-team also. I mean, that's very A-team. So
and on that too, it had connections to other things, and he obviously had particular things he was trying to accomplish as well. But that's kind of what it reminded me of, was very much an Equalizer kind of thing. This is not the Equalizer with a superpowered suit at all. This is someone clearly in over his head who doesn't know what he's doing. This is Greatest American Hero. This is not Equalizer. So I'd say that's the biggest difference in my mind.
I do wonder if that was going through their head at all, because I didn't even think about the Greatest American Hero aspect like you did, and when you say it, it makes a lot of sense to me, and it's like, yeah, that is very Greatest American Hero, and I do kind of wonder if that was the way they're going. But again, it's one of those things. It's like, I'm sure for some people maybe that were really into the comics, they might be disappointed, you know what I mean? Because they are doing a lot of different things, it sounds like, than what they did in the comics. But I think it works. For me personally, I like it. It provides a contrast, and it provides a reason, like it's a kind of a silly reason, right? But I enjoy it. I think it's kind of funny, she's, because, the girl is just like, hey, come on, summon the suit, put on the suit, that kind of a thing. And he's like, okay, I'll put on a suit. That's what he does. And I just think it's really funny the way that they do it. And I personally have enjoyed it. Chris Roberts has a comment. He said, I rather enjoy it when the MCU doesn't try to keep the character 100% exactly the same. It lets comic fans have an anchor to a favorite character, but allows for brand new storytelling. And Chris, I agree with you. I agree with you very much. In fact, one of the criticisms I hear a lot of the MCU, which is kind of funny because he's kind of become the most popular character, especially now that Iron Man's gone, is I hear a lot of criticism of Spider-Man. And actually what I hear a lot is people will say Spider-Boy. And that's the criticism that they have. And they don't like the fact that Tony Stark mentored Spider-Man, because they're like, well, that didn't happen in the comics. Well, it's like, listen, okay, this is our third theatrical version of Spider-Man, for one thing, okay? There's already been two others, right? There's already been two other versions, theatrical versions of Spider-Man. And there was actually a live action series, right? So you could even throw that in there if you want to, although that was completely different. And I don't think it actually worked very well, the live action television show. But the thing is, you can't just keep having the same character when you can't be exactly the same when you've had that many versions of them, is what I'm trying to say. So to me, it's like, okay, well, this is not the comic book Spider-Man. It's not Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which is like I always say that's my Spider-Man, because that's my first Spider-Man, was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, the cartoon. But this is the MCU Spider-Man, right? So that's what I think you have to kind of keep in mind. I think fans need to keep in mind is that you can't just do like the same thing over and over and over again. You do have to change it up. Otherwise, it gets old, it gets stale. And again, this is the MCU version, right? That doesn't mean there can't be another version down the line or something like that, especially now that we've had the introduction of the multiverse. We saw that in the Spider-Man movie, that they had all the different Spider-Men. So you can do that now in the MCU. So I think it's just interesting because I agree with you, Chris, that I think it's neat to have that sort of unique take that the MCU has on the characters, because they want them to fit within that overall context of that world. And that's one thing I really applaud about Marvel as opposed to DC. DC confuses the heck out of me with the way that they do things. In fact, we're going to be talking about that later, about maybe some of that stuff's going to change. That's our other story that we're going to be talking about, is the changes going on at DC because of Discovery's takeover. But yeah, I like it, but I do wonder sometimes for hardcore comic book people if they are kind of just like, oh, this sucks. You know what I mean? This is nothing like the comic book. But you're not hearing that from Dave, and Dave is a super fan. So, Dave, were you grabbing something or something like that? So,
yeah, I am. We keep circling what certain things are called And so what I'm attempting to do is I'm trying to actually reference the original, some of these different versions of Moon Knight to actually talk about some of the quote unquote gear that basically Moon Knight was given to use. And what I'm trying to find right now is actually in the original one when he was at, because it's interesting because he actually had a club. It was just like a billy club, and he only had one. He didn't have two because Chris Roberts said that he said, I believe they're called Kali sticks, and that's true. But what I was looking for is I was going to showcase like how, depending upon the interpretation of the character, how completely different um, it is. I'm trying to find the scene actually with the committee where they actually talk to Mark Spector and actually give him his gear. Let's see here. Well, that's where he shows up. Well, anyhow, I'm not having a lot of success here. But in the original one, he just had the one. There's actually a shot actually of him hitting. Let's see, where is it at? You can see, like, actually, it's, where am I at right here? Not right. Yeah, right here. You can see he's actually hitting the werewolf with it in the back. But he only had just the one. And I was going to talk about how over time, like, it changes. So this is Fist of Khanshu. And in Fist of Khanshu, he's given a whole arrayment of weapons. What's interesting, though, is you see that scarab there with the wings he's holding in his hand. And then
I'm kind of lost, to be honest with you.
So, right, let's see, where am I at? I'm over here. Right here, we're seeing in this panel that he's given like a whole bunch of weapons to use.
Okay.
And
all right.
what you see that scarab in his hand with the wings, which is very reminiscent of what we're seeing. But he also has like a boomerang with enchanted symbols, and so depending upon the interpretation of Moon Knight, he's given all manner of weapons. And I mean, this is just some of the Moon Knight lore. So,
holy cow.
Just some of it. So, but the sticks are kind of a thing. Like and it depends upon which interpretation. I feel like originally they were thinking with him was more like Daredevil, because Daredevil always had like the two clubs, so I think that's kind of what they were originally thinking with Moon Knight, because they like to give them clubs back then. But no, yeah, it's pretty cool. Like he has all these different weapons, which again takes me back to Batman. I know people don't like it when I do that, but it reminds me of Batman with the utility belt and all the different things that he uses. But yeah.
Chris mentioned, he says, I kind of remember a version from the 80s where he had two weapons like the sticks, but there was also a small version of a shepherd's cane and an ankh. So he's saying that those are some of the things that he remembers, which we actually just saw some of that actually in what you were just showing. So good call there, Chris. And Mats makes the point. He says, I'm big on comic books, and even in comics, storylines can vary from writer to writer or even series to series. And that is especially true with the older characters, right? I mean, if you know where Batman started, and then where Batman was, say, like in the 50s, and then versus what Batman was, today. I mean, they're just in the comics. There's so many differences with the character. Batman originally used to carry a gun, in some of the first appearances. That's like, no way. That's like, today that's like, that destroys the character. You know what I mean? But originally he did. So it's kind of funny, when you talk about that, because that's a great point, Mats, that you make, because I do hear that sometimes. And it's nice to see that, Dave is acknowledging the fact that this is very different than the comic books, but he's still enjoying it, because I do sometimes hear from comic book people that they're just like, oh, it's not like the comics. It sucks. But in the comics, they do this. You know what I mean? And it's like, sometimes the bottom line is, does it work? That's really what it comes down to. Does it work? Is it entertaining? Is the core of the character still there? Right. That's really what it comes down to.
Well,
so,
And what's interesting too about this, I would say the difference is like this. Okay, we'll take Steel. Okay, because I often bring up Steel in this show and talk about how much I dislike the movie Steel. And I know, Mom, I think you like that movie, but let me just apologize right now. So, Steel, I feel like the Shaquille O'Neal movie Steel is a perfect example. Okay, Steel, the original character, was created in the death of Superman's storyline. And
Yes.
so when Steel emerges, he's trying to basically help fill in the gap left by Superman's absence. He builds kind of his own version of an Iron Man kind of suit with all these different weapons and arraignments, and enables him to fly and whatever else. And he may or may not have abilities after he pulls himself out of the wreckage, in the fallout from the fight with Doomsday and whatever. And he has the Superman S emblazoned on his chest because he is the Man of Steel. Okay. But without Superman as a point of inspiration, without the battle with Doomsday that actually helps to create Steel, like that's why Steel exists in the comics. So Steel without Superman doesn't make sense. Okay. That's one of the problems with the Steel movie. Once you take Superman out of his origin, it gets kind of weird because that's not Steel. You've now removed the core inspiration for the character and it's now gone away. And then it would be like this. It would be like having Moon Knight without Khonshu. Like it's like you take away this key important element because Khonshu does talk to Mark. Khonshu talks to Steve, like, Khonshu talks to Moon Knight. Like, that's the thing. So it would almost be like you take Khonshu out of it. You go, well, how do we tell the story of Moon Knight without Khonshu? And you're like going, well, wait a minute, that's not Moon Knight now. Like, that changes everything. He is the servant of Khonshu. He's the fist of Khonshu. Now we're saying he's the avatar of Khonshu, on the mortal plane. So you start messing with this stuff and all of a sudden you change what it is. And one of the things that's neat about Moon Knight that I like is how they're trying to find a way to nod to all the different interpretations of Moon Knight and use that to lean into the schizophrenia, the dissociative disorder, like all these different aspects are Moon Knight, and we're using that as part of the help us understand mentally what's going on with this character. And we still have yet to know, just because Khonshu says you're trapped in Steven's body, and I think that's what's going on, we still don't know for sure. This could be a horribly tortured soul that is literally just split, you know what I mean, into three different entities, but maybe he is still just the one person and he is dealing with that much. We don't know for sure because Khonshu could be selling a bill of goods in the same way that Ethan Hawke is. He could be manipulated on both sides to do all these other people's bidding without ever at any point asking himself, what do I want? What do I want to do with this power? How do I want to make a difference? Instead of being manipulated into a situation, potentially by the villain and quote unquote, the person who gave him the abilities.
Yeah, I hear you. Chris Roberts says a Moon Knight without Khonshu is like a Superman who can't fly. Cough, Smallville. So, it's funny because I really never got into Smallville at all. By the way, PJ's in the house.
Great. First two seasons were great. After that, it kind of.
Yeah, I never got into it. PJ's in the house. He says hi to both of us. PJ, hi, PJ. From Orville Nation. There's actually a lot of Orville news going on. I actually thought about maybe discussing some of that today, but maybe possibly we can collaborate with PJ on some of this stuff because there's actually a lot of Orville news that's out there. But please check out his content. He's got a great channel. One thing I wanted to mention, you were talking a little bit about this idea that maybe he really is tortured, maybe that there is some manipulation going on. Maybe we don't have the full story yet because people are lying to him. One thing I thought was interesting was this choice they made about how he fights the entities, I guess I'll call them. So the way they do it basically is that nobody else apparently can see the entity except for him. And I thought that was really interesting because at first, I was like, especially with the first episode, I was like, this is kind of interesting to me because I compare it to the Joker, where a lot of it's like, okay, is this really happening or is it in his head? And of course, the character is supposed to be like mentally deranged, and he obviously is. Even if you had a soul, if that is an explanation, and that's exactly what happened. If you had a soul stuck in your head, you'd probably go crazy too. You'd probably have some issues. You know what I mean? So, regardless of whether that's made up or it's a real thing, either way, it's going to mess you up. And I just think it's interesting that they establish that basically, yeah, these things are real. They can actually impact the world and stuff like that and do things, but apparently nobody else can see it except for him. I'm curious if that's something that comes from the comic books or not, and what you think of that whole thing of the idea that these entities somehow exist. They obviously can do things. They throw them around, but it was kind of funny, like when you see him, the way people are seeing him, it's comical, right? Because he's basically looks like he's beating himself up. You know what I mean? So it's kind of
Right.
interesting.
Well, in the comics, all of the monsters and the creatures and everything that Moon Knight fights are real. Like they are tangible. Other people can see them. All of the serial killer type characters, all of them that Moon Knight has fought, they are. But there are stories where Moon Knight is questioning whether what he's seeing is real or not real too. So what I feel like what they're trying to do is show us that the reason other people can't see them is because for whatever reason they're enchanted, they're magical, and Mark can see them because with the Moon Knight persona, he's in tune. But I feel like too, they're also kind of potentially setting up that scenario that it could explain why there are werewolves and vampires and whatever amongst us in the MCU, but you don't necessarily see them in the same way, again, that Dracula doesn't have a reflection. So we will see exactly how they want to play this out. But in the comics, that when Moon Knight fights one of these creatures, they're real, they're tangible. When he fought Jack Russell, the werewolf by night, other people were seeing Moon Knight fighting a werewolf. Like it was very clear what was happening. So to the person on the street, anyway.
That is interesting that you brought up the point of how that kind of impacts and might fit in the wider MCU, and that does make some sense. That the idea that because we haven't seen really a lot of like magic, supernatural in the MCU, that's a way to kind of explain it. Is that, well, in the MCU you can't actually see this stuff. You know what I mean? It's there, but unless you yourself, have magic or whatever, you can't see it. You know what I mean? So I think that is an interesting way to go, because then you can kind of get away with the fact where it's like, well, wait a second, how come they weren't around, in the first Iron Man movie and stuff like that? Because that's what goes through my head, So just like, a lot of speculations going on how they're going to deal with the mutants when they finally bring mutants, into the MCU, how they're going to do that. Because it's like, well, where have they been? I think that's one of the problems with the Eternals, right? I think that's one of the reasons it bombed, was people were like, okay, where the hell have these guys been this entire time? You know what I mean? This is stupid, That's what I thought. I mean, because I know almost nothing about the characters. Like, I have nothing invested in them. But just seeing the trailer and seeing the premise where it's like, okay, they've been here for 1,000 years or whatever doing nothing, and now they're finally going to do something. Okay, wait a second. Thanos just like destroyed half the universe, and you guys didn't do anything. But now you're going to do something? It's just stupid to me, right? So I do kind of like what you're saying, is that maybe this is a way that kind of makes sense, especially for someone like me, where you can say, okay, well, that's where all the ghosts and goblins have been all this time. They've been there. You just can't see them because none of the characters up until now had magic powers. You know what I mean? So they weren't based in magic. Now that we're getting Doctor Strange, and now that we've, made Scarlet Witch more witch, less mutant or whatever, now we can kind of understand, okay, well, now we can start to see these things because we have characters that are able to see these things. You know what I mean? I like what you were saying there. So,
and it's interesting too, Eric, because like in more recent Moon Knight comics, they've talked about the concept. This is walking back, but walking into what you're saying. They've talked about how that Uru, the metal that actually Thor's hammer is made from, is actually mined on the moon. Okay, and then tying that all kind of back in, right? And then as I was flipping through some of the Essential Moon Knight volumes I've got here, which I showed earlier, looking for like images of the different weapons that he's had, his little crescent, shurikens that he uses. Chris was talking about the Ankh. He did at one time actually have an Egyptian Ankh that he could use like a club. All these different.
Moonarangs.
Yeah, exactly. The Moonarangs. What's interesting about all this is, as I was flipping through that, I did see, like, I forgot about it, a couple issues with Doctor Strange. So I feel like you're probably onto something, Eric, that there's going to be more connections to the magical side of the MCU with Moon Knight than maybe necessarily the quote unquote God side. So it's going to be interesting to see where the rest of these episodes take us, where they're going to take us more to Thor, which is what I was originally thinking, or they're going to take us more to Doctor Strange and take us to the magical side. And it could be one of those things that maybe these creatures have an enchantment, that maybe have been cast by, the Ancient One once upon a time to protect people from the horrors of the things that are around them. And that's why, quote unquote, mortals, muggles, what do you want to call it, cannot see some of these creatures that are there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. James Stone's in the house. Hey, James. He says, hey there. Just finished episode 2 a bit ago. Jumped on here at the right time, I guess. Absolutely, James. You got here at the right time. And let us know what you think about the episode, whether you liked it or not. And if there was anything in particular, maybe you didn't like or you did or you really liked. Let us know. Chris has another comment. He says, I've been viewing monsters not being seen the same way the Discworld novels do. They are right there, but our brains cannot comprehend they are there. In the books, it's worded as the being death is always there, but no one wants to notice death sitting next to you eating pancakes at a restaurant. Laugh out loud. And I that's an interesting idea there too, is that, it's almost like you don't want to see it, right? Like it's like one of those things where, yes, it's there, but you really don't even want to acknowledge it. And I think that works. I mean, it definitely is a good explanation, again, I think, for why we haven't seen this stuff before, in the MCU. Right. So I think that does make a lot of sense. So PJ gets right to the crux of it. So did you guys like Moon Knight? So I'll speak for myself, first of all. So far, I'm enjoying it, PJ. I am enjoying it. And I wonder if you've been watching it at all, PJ, if you have any thoughts about it. But what about you, Dave? Getting right to it. So did you like Moon Knight?
I am really enjoying Moon Knight. Like I said, it is very different because it's a very MCU version of Moon Knight. But I am really, really enjoying it. And part of the reason I feel like I'm enjoying it too, even though I'm a diehard comics fan, and I showed this earlier, this is just some of the Moon Knight lore. This is just some of it. This is just some of it, everyone. This is not all of it. Like this is 3 phone books right here. The thing with Moon Knight, and we'll just show these off, a little show and tell. This is volume 3. And the thing that I think is really fun about the character of Moon Knight is the fact there are so many different interpretations of the character. Like that's part of, in my mind, what makes the character so much fun, and I talked before about all these different monsters and creatures. If you see, here's a crazy super science angle, with this monster that's got these weird electrodes in his head. And then you got the moon-shaped cape. We talked about that. See the moon-shaped cape. So, that's the thing that's fun about Moon Knight. And we'll start with this image here because that's kind of fun, stained glass scarlet. But again, I've talked before, this to me is one of the most amazing images of Moon Knight. And then if you notice, see what he's holding in his hand? There's that club we were talking about earlier. And there's the crescent, the moonarangs on his belt. So that's the thing that's fun about the character is there are so many different interpretations. And what I'm enjoying right now is how they're taking all these different interpretations and finding a way to kind of make them work. And at the same point, like I said, I feel like this next episode coming up, that's the one where I'm going to be freaking out the most because we're in spoiler talk. We're in Egypt. Mark Spector is very clearly in the driver's seat. He is completely different. He is completely different from Steven. He's literally sitting on the floor getting drunk. Like, clearly he is in charge. It is going to be a very, very different episode, I think, with episode 3 with Mark in control. And it could be maybe a little bit more Netflix because Mark is more hard-edged. So I'm really, really curious to see what this next episode is going to be like, because tonally it might completely shift because Mark is in charge.
Yeah, I agree, and you know it should. It definitely should. So it's going to be nice to see Mark. For me, it's going to be nice seeing Mark in charge. You know, I'm ready for a little break from Steve right now. So I'm just like,
and we have yet to see Jake Lockley, the third persona. So I was wondering, but I have this feeling that there is a third persona. And I was thinking about this. What if you get 2 episodes of Steven, 2 episodes of Mark, and 2 episodes of Jake? And they're completely different. I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with this, because if tonally it changes because Mark's in charge, then I almost bet money we're going to get a version of Jake Lockley, because then we get 2 episodes of Jake, and we round out all of the Moon Knight that those of us who read the comics are familiar with. Although I feel like Jake has got to be a tortured soul compared to what we're seeing so far. Mark is already pretty tortured, but I feel like Jake might even be worse, but we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if they do that. And that's a neat idea. If it is 2 episodes each, that would be an interesting way to go about it. James had another comment where he said, regarding the Eternals, to me, it would have made more sense to say they were all or most snapped away than the reason they gave. And I'll go farther than that, James. I think even then I'd be like, oh, that's still stupid, because where the hell were they? You know, when all this stuff was happening before the snap. You know what I mean? That's so for me, that's one of the things. Again, I have no attachment to the Eternals at all. I've never read any of the comics. I don't even know who these characters are. So I was strictly just going by the trailers. But you know what? That was the same thing with Guardians of the Galaxy. And I got pulled into Guardians of the Galaxy and I loved it, you know, and I had no idea who these characters were. So it can be done. I just think that the way that they, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy makes sense because, hey, they're on another planet, right? So that makes sense. That's why they're not helping out. But the Eternals, to me, I'm like, okay, this is just lame. Just the whole concept to me, I think it was a mistake. And I think maybe Marvel understands that now because it was a bomb. I think it's their first legitimate, true bomb of the MCU is the Eternals. Hollywood says, I'm still watching the X-Files and Game of Thrones. I'm a little behind still. So, Game of Thrones. Hollywood, if you're watching Game of Thrones and you haven't got to the end, I think you're going to be very, very disappointed. I know I was, because I was a huge Game of Thrones fan. And then like the last, 2.5 seasons or so, I just thought were garbage, especially the last season was just unforgivably bad in my opinion. So, we'll see where you go with that, Hollywood. And PJ says he hasn't seen it yet. So PJ, definitely I would tell you to check it out. You know, I think you might like it. I think you might enjoy it. So I mean, I've only seen the first 2 episodes so far, but I think you might enjoy it if you check it out. James also said, I really enjoyed the rooftop chase, and the fight felt very comic book in all the right ways to me. I'd have preferred him in the costume, but that might be me as a fan of the spandex. There we go. Okay. So yeah. I enjoyed it. I thought they did a good job on it. And then Mott's had a quick question for you, Dave. He said, Dave, quick question. I did not read a lot of Moon Knight comics, so I'm not an expert on Stephen Grant. The show is making him more like an Indiana Jones. Was that how he was in the comic books?
No. Steven was not like an Indiana Jones at all. Like I really feel like the best way to, and then you can see here on this cover, we'll use this cover as an example, because I feel like visually it represents. So these are the different personas of Moon Knight. So you see the guy with the tuxedo there with Marlene. a la Rune, that is Stephen Grant. He's very much a Bruce Wayne. In the center, we have, Soldier of Fortune, ex-CIA Marine, Mark Spector, who is very much a mercenary, a military man, a warrior. And then on the far side, the guy who doesn't seem to fit either one of these gentlemen, that is Jake Lockley. That is the down on his luck cab driver. So they are very, very different from each other. But Steven is definitely not the bumbling gift shop guy that he is in the Moon Knight show at all. In the original comics, he was very much a kind of a Bruce Wayne type of persona. He was an uber wealthy socialite. So,
yeah, that's definitely different. I mean, because he is not suave at all. You know what I mean?
Nope.
He is just
nope.
He's a big dork. You know what I mean? For lack of a
Yep.
better term. It's
Yeah.
just so they definitely have changed that, and I do wonder if there's some hardcore comic book fans out there that are kind of upset about that, because
I'm not.
I don't know how
I'm
I would
not.
feel
I'm
if
fine
I was invested in the character. I guess the only
I'm
thing I
fine
could
with
think of is if they did that to Bruce Wayne, like if they made Bruce Wayne like a bumbling idiot, like a total dork. You know what I mean? I would probably be upset, to be honest with you. I'd probably be like, that's not Bruce Wayne, So I wonder if there's some people out there that are like that.
But again, I could see that. But like I said, if you look at how they're trying to set up the differences between the personalities, if they're personalities versus different people trapped inside one body, to me, I feel like it kind of works for the kind of story that they're telling. And like I said, I like the idea that maybe there was a conversation to make it very Chris Reeve, Clark Kent, Superman, the difference between Mark Spector and Stephen Grant. Which makes me wonder, what is the difference going to be between Jake Lockley and Stephen Grant, or Jake Lockley and Mark Spector? Like, how completely different is that going to be?
Yeah, I guess we'll see. And like I said, I don't really have a basis of comparison, so I'm just coming in with the clean slate. I get a little information from you from time to time about how it was in the comics versus how it is in the show. So far, I'm enjoying it. And again, coming from that clean slate, don't really have any expectation. I'm just like, I just want to be entertained. And so far, I'm enjoying it.
And even as a diehard comics and Moon Knight fan, I'm really enjoying it too. Like, I'm along for the ride. They haven't done anything so far that's made me go, well, that's not right, because so much of the character is in canon and right. I'm just enjoying it. And like I said, there are a lot of things about, again, Moon Knight that was put together on the run. So I'm kind of maybe a little bit more okay with some of this because I've read so many of the stories. I've seen so many different interpretations of the character. It feels right to me.
Gotcha.
And then Aisha says on here, forget this noise. Talk about Sonic 2. So I did actually get to see Sonic 2 actually with Asia. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had not seen the first movie, but I really loved the second one. It was a lot of fun. I laughed a lot, and I really enjoyed it. So,
and I have seen neither. I have seen neither. No, Asia, so, actually, he's got another question here, but he PJ from Warville Nation, he had a question earlier that was off topic. Basically, he was asking about Picard, and PJ, I am not watching Picard. I don't know if you've been watching the second season of Picard, Dave, but I have not been watching it at all. I will not watch it. I refuse to watch it. I'm not going to get CBS. Well, it's what is it now? It's Paramount Plus. I'm not going to subscribe to it. In fact, I think I had that conversation with PJ one time privately, where I was like, I'm not going to subscribe ever again. I'm sorry. I'm just done. So
if Asia decides that she wants to watch Picard, I will watch Picard with her. But so far, for me personally, I am so disturbed by Strange New Worlds that it's making me want to just stay away from all of it. Like, I'm wearing my Space Seed Star Trek shirt tonight, and I realize I'm just an old school Star Trek fan, I think. So yeah, unless Asia tells me I want to watch some of Picard season 2, I'm not going to go out of my way. I'm not. Yeah. I still feel like the best, the Orville is its own thing, but I feel like if you love classic Trek, you should just be watching the Orville. I've said that like I don't know how many times on this show. I'll say it again. If you love classic Trek, the Orville is where you belong. And where is it's as season 3 hasn't started yet, has it?
Yeah.
When
right.
is it starting? I mean, come on. That's what I'm waiting for. So that will be fun, and I'm very much excited about that. But I was so excited about Strange New Worlds, but you know, you're recasting all the original crew yet again, and I'm just like, I can't. I can't. I don't no. Sorry.
Yeah, PJ,
Maybe.
You missed our rant from last week where we were talking about all those announced recasts of classic characters, and we were pretty pissed off, PJ. So for me, I'm done. I will not check it out. I will not pay for it. And you know my thoughts on piracy. I don't do it because I'm a filmmaker myself. It'd be hypocritical for me to do piracy, and I won't pay for it. So I'm not going to watch it.
And then two more. I was going to put.
We had a couple comments.
Things. Go ahead.
Let's get the comments going. So, okay. PJ also said that Sonic 1 was good. I did actually hear a lot of good things about the first Sonic movie. It's one of those deals where it's like, you know, with me in the movies, generally, I'm going to go where my kids want to go because that's a big investment for me, and I'd rather go with them and watch what they want. And they just never got around to watching it. I think they actually did end up like renting it with their mom. So I never had a chance to really watch it, you know. So, but I've heard good things about it. I've heard Sonic 1 was actually quite good. I've seen some reviews of it where they talked about it, and it seems to me a lot of people really enjoyed it. Regarding Moon Knight, Jane had said that I'm going to have to watch episode 3 tonight. I'm really enjoying it too. So that's a good plan, Jane. I think that's a very good plan. And PJ had another question where he said, he is a great actor. Would you say they wasted him in Star Wars, Eric and Dave? And I'm sure he's talking about Isaac, right?
Oscar Isaac. Yep.
So I agree. I think he is a very good actor, just based on watching Moon Knight. And I hated him in Star Wars. Hated the character and thought he did a terrible job. That's me personal, but I do agree with you. I think he's a good actor. But to answer your question, yes, I think he was wasted in Star Wars. I do think he's a good actor.
I think Oscar Isaac is an incredibly talented actor. He is great in Moon Knight. I would even go and step out on a limb and say that I enjoyed him as Apocalypse. A lot of people, I think, have forgotten that he was Apocalypse in the X-Men movies.
Never saw that one. I
There's
skipped that one completely. I totally skipped that one.
But you know, along these lines, what's interesting is Apocalypse, of course, was a ruler in ancient Egypt. So there's a lot of interesting connections here. It's not typecasting, but casting to a type, I guess. But I will say this: Oscar Isaac is proving that you can be in one Marvel movie that seems to be not very good, but from the ashes you can build a better one that we are seeing with Moon Knight.
Well, we saw that with Deadpool, right? There's already a precedent. There's already a precedent for that, which is Deadpool. So
I know, but I just made a really weird Apocalypse reference that probably one more person in the world is snickering at right now. But anyhow, I know one person out there just got that. But from the ashes, we will build a better one. Sorry, I had to do that.
There you go.
All right, but yes, I agree. A talented actor who was. I was so excited for that Top Gun Maverick X-wing pilot guy in the Star Wars movies. I loved him in the first one, and I love BB-8. And then you know, they hardly did anything with him in the last one. And the second one was so bad that slow chase, and he's running around being mutinous. It's a total waste. PJ, total waste.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And he just says, not regarding, I guess, Picard as well. It says, not while they're messing with my whales. Friggin' Picard. Effing Wakanda forever. Strange New Worlds. There we go. So, yeah, I remember you talked about that last week, Aisha. You'd mentioned that the little homage or whatever that I'm aware of, because it did get a lot of people were talking about it, that particular scene. So even without watching this show, unfortunately, stuff gets shoved in my face anyway, because, you know, I'm active on the internet, whether I want it or not. And PJ, yes, you do have to check out our rant from last week because we did go off quite a bit on all the casting for Strange New Worlds. Definitely, please check that out. Other folks, if you're in the Rogues Gallery in the audience, check out last week's episode because we did have quite a rant. Maybe I'll even make that into a clip. Maybe I'll actually clip that and put it up on YouTube so you can just watch the rant, and that's it.
And it wasn't just us, PJ. A lot of people in the Rogues Gallery felt the same way, especially Asia. I was horribly offended when I saw what they were doing in Strange New Worlds. I was like, you literally were given a brand new Trek show, and all you had to do was just kind of go a little bit by the numbers and give us a classic Trek show that we've seen how many seasons of classic Trek, like, and I'm talking about like all of it, like just there's so much great stuff. It's like it is a little formulaic, yes, but then give us a new crew with new aliens. Like, that sounds like fun. But what did they do? No. We're just going to recast all the original crew. We're just going to shove them in all over the place and have you constantly watching the show asking your question like, well, wait a minute, doesn't that contradict? Wait, I don't, huh? Like, what? I don't know. So no. No. And then ignore characters that we know should be on there because we've seen the pilot for the Cage and we've seen the Menagerie and we know a little bit about who was serving with Pike on board the Enterprise. You're going to ignore them and then you're going to shove in all these random original series characters that don't make any damn sense. And then we know that Kirk is going to show up at some point. And I'm just like, no, please, for the love of God. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? There you go. Preview.
So I guess, PJ, you don't have to check it out. You just got it. So there you go. Because you don't have to check out the last episode.
Oh, God.
Mott says, Asia, if Dave ever makes you mad, you can put him in timeout while watching Picard. There you go. The
I don't know how I feel about that.
The ultimate punishment. Yeah. And Holly was talking about that earlier. He says, don't forget about Top Gun. Because I know you have been looking forward to Top Gun, Dave, although you have not been happy with all the delays.
I'm so annoyed because Top Gun is coming out the same weekend as Phoenix Fan Fusion. And then Asia and I were going to go see Tears for Fears. She got us tickets for Tears for Fears. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? So we've got Tears for Fears. We're doing the convention, which I'm a guest at. And then Top Gun's going to come out too. Really? Really? Is there anything else we can put on that weekend? Is there anything else we can put on that weekend? We just need... Why not? Why not? Why not?
Yep. That's the truth. And PJ, I agree with you. He says, but it's the Kurtzman, the pirate, who has hijacked Trek, Eric. That's my problem. It's like, as long as he's around, I want nothing to do with new Trek. I don't care what it is. As long as he has his fingers involved with, as long as he's still working for Paramount, I have no. I know what he's all about. I've seen the interviews, and he deliberately is divisive. He deliberately is sabotaging this. He is not a Trek fan. He is a Star Wars fan. He is not a Trek fan. So, yeah. And Asia, regarding Oscar Isaacs, was saying, yes, he is a great actor. I've seen all of his other films. Ex Machina was wild.
Yes.
I've never seen Ex Machina.
Ex Machina is fantastic. Asia just made a great recommendation. Ex Machina is a great film. It is really cool. And he was great in Ex Machina. That's what I'm talking about. Oscar Isaac's a talented guy. Like I said, he's great as Apocalypse. He's great as Apocalypse in a bad X-Men movie, but he's great as Apocalypse.
And PJ says he was good in Dune. I was not a huge fan of the new Dune movie, to be honest with you, but I thought he was pretty good. I really did. I thought he did a good job. So I agree with you there, PJ. I do think he did a good job in Dune. And of course, Chris says Orville did better Star Trek than Star Trek did. Laugh out loud, and that's the truth. Although I wouldn't say what we're seeing now with new Trek is Star Trek. I don't accept it. I think it's an abomination. I'm sorry. There's nothing Trek about it other than they use the names. Because they're just big hacks who can't, even come up with their own characters. They have to reinvent established characters. That's how, they just have no creative, anything. It's just like they have to just rely on that. So, but I agree with you. Orville is much more Trek than any of the new Trek stuff is, 100%. And Mott says, Orville is my new Star Trek. And I agree with that 100%. 100%.
I feel the same way. And again, I didn't like, for example, there were things I really liked about Discovery season 2. I'm one of the few people on the show right now who says there were things he liked about Discovery season 2. And one of the things I liked was I liked what they did with Pike because it fit canonically with the character. Like they didn't change a lot of stuff, and it felt like, oh, well, this is interesting. You're going to kind of show us Pike kind of before his accident. Okay, that's kind of fun. We got a little bit of that in the new movies. I liked Bruce Greenwood's portrayal of Pike, and I felt like this, all of a sudden I realized that Pike is this really interesting captain character that I didn't know that much about. And I remembered reading the was it Early Voyages Marvel comic book series that I really enjoyed back in the 90s. I really enjoyed that series. And I'm like going, I would love to know more about Pike. And I liked Rebecca Romijn's version of number 1, which again felt in line with Major Barrett Roddenberry's portrayal of number 1. And I'm like, this is really kind of fun, like I would love to learn more about them and their crew, okay, serving on board the original version of the Enterprise. Not let's take the original series crew and shove them into that show. No, I'm not interested in that. That to me doesn't. No, I don't know.
PJ also says, Dave, they named number 1 Una, and of course Una is 1 in Spanish. Very creative there. Very, very creative. That's new Trek. There you go. So,
but that actually comes from a Star Trek novel, actually, too. I forget the name of it. That actually predates New Trek. They were calling her Una going all the way back then. I don't think we can hang that around their neck, but
they could have gone a different direction. They didn't have to copy the book. I'll be honest, they usually don't give a crap about the books. That's one of the reasons I don't read them anymore. I actually I read a Star Trek book back when Next Gen was around, and I really liked it. And then I realized, yeah, they're never going to allude to this or have anything to do with this in the show. And I was just like, okay, I'm done with Star Trek novels because they just have nothing to do with the show, Right. So they ignore them all the time is my point. So if this is one of the cases where they decided, oh, let's take something from the novel because, we don't have any creative ideas of our own, it's just like, yeah, that's the one time you have to take something from a novel. Great. Yeah, great.
Yeah, they did. They took that from a novel. There you go. Unfortunately.
All right. I think we should move on to our other topic.
Yes.
So, because we do have a second advertised topic in the description, and I always want to make sure we at least do what's in the description by the end of the show. And we're getting close to 2 hours right now. So, actually, this was something that Dave, you had actually brought to my attention. But then I also was able to find this article, which I believe is the same article that you were referencing. Yep. We did last week talk about some of the bloodbath that's been going on at Warner Brothers as a result of Discovery taking over. And yes, Discovery is very much in charge. So this Variety article says Warner Brothers Discovery exploring overhaul of DC Entertainment. So it says the new owners of all things Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are exploring an overhaul of DC Entertainment. Multiple sources close to the situation told Variety. It's been less than a week since Discovery closed its $43 billion deal for Warner Media, joining one of the largest producers of reality programming with one of the most venerable entertainment brands under the new moniker of Warner Brothers Discovery. David Zaslav, the CEO of the combined companies, and top leadership have been toying with the idea of turning DC into its own solidified content vertical, the sources said. So it says the move would potentially affect DC feature film development in the Warner Brothers Pictures Group, streaming series at Warner Brothers Television, and the creative arm within DC proper, all in an effort to have the disparate elements more closely aligned in order to maximize the value of the superhero stable, one often seen as punching up against Marvel. So I think this is really interesting because, Dave, you talk about this all the time. You talk about, even at your time at DC, they talked about this all the time. This idea of this, more of this sort of, vertical integration. You've said it many times before. It seems they just can't do it. So
all right,
it just doesn't
so
happen.
let us rehash the past. Let us rehash the past, because apparently no one remembers the past. So the New 52, the whole point of the New 52 was to basically restart the DC universe and get it into a certain place and bring it more in line with the movies and TV interpretations, in order to basically have this synergy between all the various things that the DC properties could inhabit or become. Okay, so that your version of Green Arrow on your water bottle or whatever is the same version of Green Arrow, or more familiar to you with the version of Green Arrow that you're watching on the show, that showed up in the Justice League movie, that's in the comic book, that was also in the video game that you played 2 nights before. Okay, that was the whole idea, was to basically reset the DC universe and have everything work together and not have them be these completely separate things. That was the whole friggin' point of the New 52, was to get the DC characters, brands, universe, whatever, at a level footing, in order to have everything work again more in tandem, so that, if you wanted to learn about Batman, there was an easier point for you to go start with Batman, and that version of Batman was not completely different from the version of Batman that you just watched in the movie. Okay, it's the whole point, whole complete friggin' point. Okay, within a couple of months, all that crap had gone right out the window, but that was the original point. Okay, that was the original point. And the thing that drives me nuts about this is they're still trying to do the same thing. So let's stop looking at what they say they're trying to do, and let's think about what in the hell horrible calamity nonsense is actually going to happen, because someone has now brought up the brilliant idea that's been brought up 1,000 times before that didn't work. What's actually really going to happen? Okay, well, let's see. We just got again, my opinion, we just got a really fun Batman movie that I really liked. The Batman might be my favorite Batman movie. I mean, I really liked Pattinson's Batman. I was surprised by how much I liked it. Everyone in the film I thought was fantastic, from the guy who played the new James Gordon, to the actress who played Catwoman, to Colin Farrell's Penguin, which I say is one of the best interpretations of the Penguin I've ever seen. Like, that movie was so good and so much fun, and I loved it so much. Okay, what do we have on the horizon? We have the constantly delayed Flash movie that just got delayed again. We didn't bring that up on the show, but how many friggin' times are we going to delay the damn Flash movie?
And that one has a scandal now, thanks to the main actor.
And
so if you hadn't heard
what are we getting in that Flash movie? We're getting 2 different versions of Batman. We're getting the Ben Affleck version of Batman, who's going to show up, who may or may not fade into nothingness, in order to pave the way for the Michael Keaton version Batman to return, which I just released an image of Keaton's new Batsuit, which I quite like. And I'm like, okay, all right. So already within the movies, we have the opposite of what they want. We got too many versions of Batman running around in 2 movies that are getting ready to come out. Okay, so if an exec who doesn't read the comics, who doesn't like the books, who didn't see the movies, who doesn't give 2 whatevers, and goes, "This is too many Batmans. We just need one Batman. Let's get rid of all these other Batman because we don't need them." What Batman are we going to lose? Okay, what Batman are we going to lose? Are we going to lose the Pattinson Batman, which I really like, that I want to see more of? Are we going to lose the Keaton version of Batman, who's one of my favorite Batman of all time, who I also want to see more of? Can't we just have both? And then there's the Black Adam movie that they're working on, I'm just like, okay, just there's some really good DC movies that are getting ready to come out. Can we just leave everything the hell alone? And why don't you just go to the source? Why don't you go actually to the publishing arm and just get them in line? That's what you need to do. You need to go over to the publishing arm and you need to tell them that like we need a version of Wonder Woman that we all understand and can recognize. We need a version of Batman that we all understand and recognize. We need a version of Superman that we all understand and recognize, because that's the problem. Right now, you have two versions of Wonder Woman running around, and it's a little confusing for the Muggles. We'll use that, or the civilians, as I used to call them. They're a little confused by what's happening with Wonder Woman. They don't understand, and then they got the same problem with the Superman. It's like, is Jonathan Kent Superman? Like, that's not like what? Like, so to me, if you want to get your house in order, you need to go over to the publishing arm and figure out what's going on over there, get that in line, and leave the movie division alone until they get these movies out, because I feel like they're creating some magic over here and you need to leave it alone. You just need to leave that alone now. You need to, because you might have what they've been wanting, which is the beginnings of an amazing DC universe that people are on board with. So you need to leave the movie stuff alone for right now, get the publishing arm in check, and then kind of move forward. But I feel like they're just going to screw everything up. They're going to screw everything up in the name of brand synergy and vertical. Let's use the term vertical. Why not? Let's use the term vertical. Let's make it all vertical. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. Let's mess up the movies because it's all got to be vertical, which I guess means above ground, not dead. I don't know. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I think it makes sense exactly what you say. I mean, I'm actually for this. I've been for this for a long time because I think DC confuses the hell out of me, and I am a DC guy. I've gone on record saying I am a DC guy. I like Marvel. I love Marvel, but I prefer the DC characters, particularly the main ones: Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. I also like the real Captain Marvel. You know what I mean? There's lots of other characters I really enjoy. I used to love Green Lantern. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I love these characters, and there's so many cool things you can do with them. But I do think Warner Brothers has screwed it up a lot, and there is an issue with what you're saying. There's an issue with like someone who watches Gotham, and then I can't remember which Batman. I think it was Batfleck at that time. So you go see Batfleck, and it gets confusing. It really does. I think it gets very, very confusing. Now, Batman is different in a way because it's kind of funny because you could probably make your own studio just based on Batman movies and Batman cartoons and Batman stuff, but Batman games. You could just have a Batman company. You know what I mean? Like it is that Batman is that big. You know what I mean?
See, there's a vertical alignment synergistic idea that I would support, but I digress. Keep going.
So Batman is kind of an exception to the rule because I think for the most part, actually, people are comfortable with all these different versions of Batman. Like we've had people in the Rogues Gallery. I hate Batfleck, but there's people in the Rogue Gallery that love him. And I obviously love the Michael Keaton Batman, because that was kind of like the new Batman for me as a kid, because I actually saw that in the theater. Adam West wasn't first run. It was reruns for me, right? The Adam West Batman, that was the old Batman. That was reruns for me. So Michael Keaton was kind of like my first Batman, if that makes sense. And so I have a lot of affinity for him as well. And I think the way that they're going, I think they absolutely want to keep as many Batmen out there as possible because, I mean, we have a Lego Batman, right? I mean, and I really like Lego Batman. I thought they did a good job with that one. So there's like a Batman for all seasons. So Batman kind of does transcend this. But when it comes to like more obscure characters, and even at this point, to some extent, Wonder Woman has become somewhat obscure, at least in the sense that she's not as prolific as Superman and Batman are, right? So it's like she had one live action television show, and now she's had 2 movies, right? So she doesn't have that level that the other characters have, as far as Batman and Superman. When you start going down the list more, right, and you start getting into the Green Lanterns, you get into Flash and all that kind of stuff, it does get more obscure, and I do think a lot of people do get really confused. if they haven't watched the cartoons, if they haven't read the comics and all that kind of stuff. So I would like to see more of like an MCU, like a DC, I guess they call it sometimes a DCEU, but I think it's a mess. Personally, I think it's an absolute mess, and a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. And it goes all the way back to Man of Steel. I remember when Man of Steel came out, and all these people that are like, "Oh, the Snyderverse, bring the Snyderverse." They were out there saying when Man of Steel came out, "Oh, we don't need the other characters. DC doesn't need that. We don't need a DCEU or whatever. They don't need that." And what happened with the next movie? Immediately they bring Batman in, they bring in Wonder Woman, and it's basically a Batman movie. And it's like, where the hell was Batman when all this was happening? Which we do get to see, right? It was just kind of like, okay, yeah, you guys don't know what you're doing, do you? There's no plan here. There is no plan. And one of the things in this article they talk about is that basically what the Discovery guy is saying is we need a Kevin Feige for DC. We need a Kevin Feige. We need somebody to organize this mess and get it all together. And I would love to see the publishing side also line up with that, where we do see kind of more of a Batman that is more in line with what we're seeing in the movies and that kind of stuff, because I think it does get confusing for the average consumer. And you end up having people that are like, very specific. It's like, oh, I don't, I read the Batman, comic book, but I'm not really into anything else. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I would like to see something where it makes a little bit more sense, more of the Marvel way, I guess, of doing things, as far as that, just like with the Netflix shows we were just talking about. Those Netflix shows, they're now canon. They are part of the MCU. I want to see more of that with DC and less of all these separate little projects. I mean, don't even get me started on the CW. I mean, don't even get started. So it's weird to me.
I feel like that with the publishing arm of DC, that there was a period where I feel like they had kind of the right ideas, but stuff just kind of didn't work out the way they wanted. And I feel like they gave up on a couple of concepts too quickly. Like, I feel like that you should have, a core Batman book that makes sense, that people recognize and understand. You need that for Superman and Wonder Woman. The other characters, like, Flash, Green Arrow, whoever that is, Atom, it doesn't matter who it is, Black Canary, whatever. Obviously, all these other, besides the quote unquote, the DC Trinity. Okay. I feel like that those books can survive or stay or whatever based totally off of sales. And at one point, there was this thought that what needed to happen with the Justice League in order to move the Justice League forward is have the Titans grown up, assume those roles. So that the Justice League book is the Titan characters grown up, assuming those roles kind of in the Justice League. So you have Nightwing kind of performing the Batman function, but being different because Nightwing is not exactly like Batman. Supergirl performing the Superman role, even though Supergirl's not exactly Superman, such on and so forth. I feel like that was really the right direction, because you have the legacy for the people who've been reading the comics for the long time, and then you have the tried and true with your core books. But for whatever reason, they couldn't figure it out, and it didn't work. But the publishing arm, to me, is the part that needs to be the most kind of reined in. I feel like most DC fans are familiar enough with the concept of the multiverse that they can handle a couple of different Batman running around in a couple of different movies for a couple of years. And so I feel like some of this can be left alone. I just feel like there might be some magic that's happening on the movie side, and we need to we don't need to be tinkering with the movie side right now. I feel like they're already tinkering too much with this Flash movie. And I'm a little concerned what we're going to get versus what may or may not have come out at one point. And it makes me nervous, because I want to see Keaton return. And I feel like, leave the Black Adam movie alone. Let the Flash movie be. Let's get another Pattinson Batman movie. And you guys get the publishing arm in check. Focus on that. And then once you get that in check, then turn around and take a look at the movie division. But by then, we'll have had our Black Adam, we'll have had our Flash movie, we'll have had hopefully another Pattinson Batman movie, or at least one will be in production, and then I will be quiet for a minute. So that's just how I'm feeling about it, because this just makes me nervous, because I just feel like the stuff that hasn't come out is now going to get tinkered with. because it doesn't fit with the vertical alignment of the DC universe with the synergistic whatever. And it's like, just keep your corporate buzzwords out of these movies, and let's just let these movies be what they're going to be. Get the publishing arm in check, then come back and revisit this. But these films that have already been worked on, let's just see them for what they are, and let's just let them be. Because the fact that we're getting a Black Adam movie that has Hawkman and Dr. Fate in it, can we just, that's awesome. Let's just leave that alone. Let's just let that be.
Well, I don't think there's going to be much they're going to do with stuff that's already done, Dave. I really don't. I mean,
my gosh.
It for one thing, it costs a lot of money to do that. So I don't think they're going to really fool with stuff that's already done. It's really about how they mash all this stuff together later on. Because, like I said, I think DC's just done a horrible job as far as integrating their characters together in a natural way that doesn't seem just kind of thrown together. They should have done what they did at Marvel. They should have established each character in their own movie and then bring them all together. I don't know why that's so hard. I don't know why they literally saw that happening and saw how well it did. And instead what they did was they said, you know what? We got to get on that Avengers action. Let's just throw out the Justice League. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, come on. Seriously, guys. Come on, it doesn't work that way. You got to take your time and build it up. People are not that familiar with a lot of these characters, you know what I mean? So, especially when you're talking about, again, beyond the top three, you start talking about Cyborg, you talk about Flash. People just aren't as familiar with those characters. They just aren't. So it's like you got to establish them, and it's just like, I don't know. That's the way I feel about it, and I really don't think that they're going to do much screwing with the stuff that's already made because, again, it's just too expensive. Even if they want to, there's really what can they do at this point unless they just want to throw money away. They've already thrown a lot of money into this deal, so it's like they need to just. I think they'll coast for a while, and hopefully, that integration will happen, down the line, because they don't have their Kevin Feige yet. In fact, this article says they offered the job to somebody, she didn't want it, so they're still trying to find that person. So, but I think that's a good idea because, again, I like what Marvel does. I think what DC does is kind of stupid. That's just me. And again, I'm a DC guy. So,
well, I feel like that with a lot of this, it kind of makes sense. And I feel like if they leave the current movies that are in production alone, they have the beginnings of what they kind of wanted in a weird sort of way. And that if they just get the publishing arm in check, and if they sit back and they look in the wake of these films, the ones that performed well, the ones that didn't perform as well, that they have the beginnings here to actually do something really cool. But I just feel like they just need to leave these current films that are in production alone and then come back to it, because unfortunately, Eric, Warner's has demonstrated that they will throw a bunch of money at something and make it 1,000 times worse trying to fix it before it comes out. They've done it a lot. The Justice League movie alone goes to show.
But I like the theatrical version. I don't like the Snyder version. So I don't like the Snyder cut. So it's kind of like, so I'm always kind of like different. You know what I mean? Because I know all these people that love the Snyderverse. I hate it. You know what I mean? And I like the theatrical version of Justice League. I even own it. So,
and see
that's where I'm at. I'm different, I guess. So,
and I feel like that goes back to the whole Kevin Feige thing too. Like, I feel like whether they say it or not, I feel like someone seemed to think that Zack Snyder could be their guy to put their universe together. So, like, that's what I'm talking about. Like,
again, this is the guy that Man of Steel. I remember when they were promoting it, and they said, "We don't need that. We don't need no Batman in a Superman movie. DC characters are just like that. They don't need the other characters." And literally, the next movie is Batman versus Superman. It's just like, you guys, come on, figure it out. Find somebody that understands. Because I don't think Snyder's the guy for sure, but they do need somebody I think. I really do. They do need that Feige. Chris brings up an interesting point. He says, I still feel DC needs to get the writers from the animated movies to write or help write the live action movies. That's interesting, Chris. I haven't seen a lot of the more recent animated films, to be honest with you. So I'm not really sure what the state of those films are. I think you've seen quite a few of the more recent ones, haven't you, Dave?
I haven't seen a lot of the more recent ones. I was honestly, the ones I was enjoying the most were actually the ones where they were attempting to adapt existing stories, like New Frontier, Dark Knight Returns. Um, I really loved Under the Red Hood. I feel like Under the Red Hood's still one of the best DC direct animated movies they've ever made. Under the Red Hood was really good. Year One was fantastic. I love the adaptation they did of Year One. I was enjoying those more than some of the later films they've done. The later films are good. I've seen quite a few of them, but I just kind of lost interest with them because I didn't feel like, again, the Public Enemies. Public Enemies is really good. Like, they just don't. I was more excited to the direct to video, digital, whatever the hell you want to call it, movies being adaptations of classic DC stories like Red Sun, like Gotham by Gaslight. Like, I wanted to see more of that than what they began to do, which was more an interconnected, New 52-esque DC universe. And some of the stuff was good, but I just honestly, I preferred what they were doing when they were doing New Frontier and Returns and Year One. Killing Joke was pretty bad, but we'll let that go.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people were disappointed in that one, and yeah, it is what it is. I like the '90s type stuff, and all the way into the Justice League cartoons that were all inspired by all that kind of stuff. I have a couple of the Superman animated series, from the '90s, and that's a great show. And obviously, we always go on and on about the Batman animated series from the '90s. I mean, it just that's definitely my Batman. So I would love to see more stuff like that. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, I haven't kept up with a lot of the more recent animated stuff. But it's an interesting point, Chris, that you make. So I guess I would have to check it out, and then I could kind of give you more of an opinion on that and whether I thought that was a good idea or not. But Hollywood says, you just need to start the Dave Beatty universe. There you go. That's what it's all about right there. Independent stuff, man.
I have been actively trying to work on and have that be a reality for quite some time. Hollywood, time will tell, but there are things in the works. So we'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, there are. And of course, Motts brings up Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, which is a big favorite of both of ours. And we did do a review of Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, so you can check on Facebook or YouTube. Those should be archived there, so you can check those out as well. And we're big fans of Mask of the Phantasm.
Mask of the Phantasm is again, I love the new Pattinson Batman movie a lot. But Mask of the Phantasm is still easily one of the best Batman movies ever made. And up until recently, it was my favorite Batman movie ever made.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. There was something that was brought up in the Rogues Gallery that I thought was interesting, because I had wanted to actually do a story about it, but I just never got to it. And so I just want to briefly acknowledge this comment from Hollywood, where he was talking about that Pluto has the Stargate channel now. And he says, I love that show.
Interesting.
That happened a couple weeks ago. And I actually saw, when I think it was Gate World or one of those big Stargate, fan hubs or whatever, they were talking about this. And I actually watch Pluto quite a bit. I actually watch Doctor Who on there quite a bit. And then I actually watch Bar Rescue. I think I've talked about that before. I love Bar Rescue. I watched that on there. I'll actually catch up on Walking Dead on there, because they have an AMC channel, and they will do even some pretty recent episodes of The Walking Dead. And I don't have cable, so that's the only way I can see it. Although I think Walking Dead kind of sucks now, to be honest with you. The writing just is kind of in my opinion. But I catch up on a lot of that stuff. So I can't say enough good things about Pluto TV, and the fact that now they have a Stargate channel is freaking awesome. And so I definitely would advise people to check that out if you're a Stargate fan, because it's free. So good for them for doing that. And by the way, unlike the Star Trek channel, which is just next gen, which I think is kind of kind of misleading. I wish they would just call it Next Gen or something, or the, TNG or something, because it is misleading, because you think, well, wait a sec, Star Trek channel, they should have all the Star Trek shows, right? No, they don't. They just show Star Trek: The Next Generation. My understanding is the Stargate channel is not like that. They show all 3 shows. So they've got, Universe, Atlantis, and SG1, which is my favorite, SG1. That's the classic show to me. But they have apparently all 3. They'll go through all the rotation of all 3. So it really is a Stargate channel. The only thing they don't have is the animated series, which I think everybody hates. So, so that's the only thing they don't. And in fact, I think they even have the movies too. Like they have the straight to DVD movies, and the theatrical movie, I think, is also in the rotation. So they have everything basically except the cartoon. So pretty cool.
Cool. I think we do have some comments we probably want to cover, but I think we might be good to start moving to the outro. We're over 2 hours. So
yeah, I'm definitely good with that. I'm definitely good with that.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the outro, and then we'll probably cover a couple comments here on the way out. So I want to thank you for all watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. If you're curious to learn more about me, see some of the things I've worked on, you can definitely check out my website. That's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. You can also, while you're there, actually get the copy of the Retro Rogues fanzine. We've been promoting that a lot. Definitely go there and check that out. It's got that really good Moon Knight primer in there. There's a really great article with Benjamin Glendenning. There's a great article that my friend Ed Harris, not the actor, wrote about collecting original comic book art, which is really good too. So definitely go over there and check that out. Download it for free. It is yours for free. It is our gift to you. But enough about that. I want to thank, as always, my great co-host, Mr. Eric Alexander, as always, providing his unique perspective and point of view on all the fun things we like to talk about here on the show. Eric, please tell the folks watching at home where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I am most active on Twitter. You can reach me there at BassGod14. That's at BASSGOD14. That's also the official YouTube. That's also the official Twitch account. So if you comment on any of those platforms, more likely than not, I'll be the one responding to you. My DMs are wide open on Twitter. I do take suggestions from you folks in the Rogues Gallery as far as stuff to cover. I'm always looking for, interesting rumors, interesting stories that we can cover on the show, different things to review. And, we do a wide variety of stuff here. We've got the Collector's Corner, Streaming War segments, pop culture news. And obviously we do a lot of reviews of TV shows and movies, both classic and modern. As, today we were doing Moon Knight. So definitely let me know if you have any additional suggestions. And let's see what we got in the Rogues Gallery. Hollywood says, I love bars as long as I'm not behind them. I totally get you. I totally understand that, Hollywood. Totally. Chris says, great show as always, guys. Really appreciate your comments, Chris. You had a lot of good comments tonight, so I really appreciate you contributing to the show. Jane says she enjoyed the show. Hollywood says, great show, guys. Bye, everyone. And Mott's also says, great show. See ya. And I think I will give PJ the last word. He said, Stargate is one of the last major sci-fi franchises to remain uncorrupted. So with that, we'll give PJ the last word.